On today's 7th Circle Gaming, we're going to be talking about the game Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII. And we start off here, as we always do, with our full disclosures. The game was purchased some time ago. It was played on normal difficulty. It was played with a gamepad. And none of those cutscenes were skipped. The game was also played without guides or walkthroughs. And so then we'll move on to section number 1 here. Immersion. Statistics focus. The game does present players with statistics to examine and to attempt to optimize their performance in game. And some of those in-game assets, in-game objects, are purely cosmetic and count more toward player agency, but the vast majority of them have some sort of a statistics effect. However, it does serve to immerse the player in the game with that agency. And graphically, the game presents presents players with a relatable but significantly different from their average everyday experience. So they do rely on the game to provide them an explanation of how this world works, and that figures positively toward its immersion. And the game does have a challenging combat system. We're going to see an example of that a little bit later. For now, we'll just give a rough description of it. And the game does present cutscenes and has a story that roughly ties events together. So then, here's an example of what we were talking about a little bit ago with the customization system. In game, they're called schemata, and they roughly correspond to an outfit and a skill set. And these are unlocked, purchased, or provided by the game to the player. And they have various visual effects, and they also have statistics effects. So it's an interesting sandwich of player agency and statistics with that. Now then, this is a rough example of what the game world looks like. It's the first level of the game, no story spoilers here. And it is somewhat relatable, but it's also somewhat different. Obviously, walking around with a big sword and a shield on one's arm isn't going to necessarily be looked upon with any sort of smiles and being inconspicuous. Now then, that combat system that we talked about a little bit ago, this is a short example of what that looks like from an early part of the game. What we can see is all of this is done with gamepad inputs, and it all has to be done fairly quickly, and then the enemies are able to react to what the player does, and the player must respond pretty effectively, pretty quickly, and change their move sets on a regular basis, so it keeps the player engaged in that way. And that's going to bring us on to difficulty. Now, for difficulty, the game has earned a 6.5 out of 15. The user interface does not contribute over much to difficulty. However, it should be noted that before the game starts, players are given the opportunity to set their input prompts. However, what we found over numerous playthroughs of the game is that prior to the campaign start, the options that are there don't necessarily affect those in game, so be aware of that and be ready to set the input prompts to either keyboard or gamepad, depending on the player is going to use. The game has two initial options for difficulty, and the effect of choosing each option is roughly explained with an opportunity to actually go back and set it to one of the difficulty settings. So that's all to the good. The game again has earned that 6.5 out of 15, and we're going to move on to Lasting Appeal. This is part of a long series of games in the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy, so players who are more familiar with the game and the characters will find it more long-lasting than others. The game does attempt to introduce players to the game world and to the characters in it, but honestly, players who are more already invested in the series will get more out of the game than those who aren't. And some players will find the ticking clock mechanic that the game employs somewhat frustrating. There is no mod support, and there is no further DLC downloadable content forthcoming for the game, which is going to contribute to an overall limited replay value. Players might be able to do challenge runs or attempt to unlock more things, but that's not going to last forever. And the combat system is somewhat engaging, as we've already noted, and the world is somewhat relatable. So, overall, a 5.5 out of 15 is what the game has earned. Now then, on to our final analysis. The game has earned a 6.5 out of 15, which is slightly below average, and some of that is coming from the players being thrown immediately into the middle of a story that's existing without having any investment in those characters. The limited replay value of the game, the ticking clock mechanic can be frustrating for some players. They might ultimately rely on a guide or a walkthrough to assist them with making up all of it. On the other hand, the combat system seems seemingly very engaging. And that's going to bring us to one statement here that I do find that I will clarify is very subjective, and therefore it did not give any weight to the game's score, but it is sort of a personal statement. I personally found the game's combat system to be very engaging. It has an interesting mix of instant reaction and tactics that really really kept me immersed and kept me involved in the game throughout the playthrough. So then, if we were to make one more final subjective statement, Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII is a fantastic combat system in search of a game. So then, we'll just ask you to do the obligatory YouTube things like, comment, subscribe, and show that you do appreciate these more objective game analyses as opposed to a game review. Thank you. That's all I've got for today.